The snow fell in thick sheets across the Siberian wasteland as Marcus Cade sat motionless in his isolation cell at Volkov Maximum Security Complex. The facility was carved into the side of a mountain, a fortress of concrete and steel designed to hold Russia's most dangerous criminals. For 18 months, Marcus had been rotting in this tomb, convicted of assassinating a Chinese diplomat during a peace summit in Moscow. Was innocent. Marcus had been a Delta Force operative, one of the best America had ever produced. His entire adult life had been devoted to serving his country, completing missions in places that didn't officially exist, eliminating threats that were never publicly acknowledged. And then, in one orchestrated moment, his entire world had collapsed. The mission briefing had been straightforward: provide security for Ambassador Chen during the Moscow Peace Summit. Intelligence suggested multiple threat vectors. Marcus's team was positioned on the perimeter, watching, waiting. Then the shot rang out. Chen collapsed, blood pooling beneath him on the marble floor. Within hours, forensic evidence pointed directly at Marcus. His rifle. His firing position. His fingerprints. Witnesses who claimed they'd seen him take the shot. The evidence was airtight, too airtight. By the time Marcus understood what was happening, he'd been extradited to Russia as a gesture of diplomatic goodwill, tried in a closed military tribunal, and sentenced to life imprisonment. No one from his government came to his defense. No one questioned the narrative. He'd been burned or erased, abandoned, but Marcus Cade wasn't the kind of man who accepted defeat. For 18 months, he'd watched, studied, learned every detail of this prison's operations. The guard rotations changed every 6 hours, but the shift supervisors followed predictable patterns. The electronic locks had a 3-second vulnerability during system updates. The ventilation network connected to the old mining tunnels beneath the facility. And most importantly, the security team had grown complacent. They'd never had an escape attempt succeed. Tonight, that would change. The whispered conversation between 2 guards near his cell had confirmed what Marcus had suspected for weeks. They weren't planning to let him serve his sentence. Orders had come from somewhere high up. Within the next 72 hours, Marcus Cade would die in what would be reported as a prison riot. Quick. Clean. Permanent. He had 48 hours to get out. At 0314 hours, the facility's power grid cycled for routine maintenance. The backup generators kicked in, but for 3 seconds, exactly 3 seconds, the electronic locks disengaged and re-engaged. Marcus had been waiting for this moment. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. Over the past months, he'd carefully loosened a ventilation grate in his cell, working at it during the brief periods when guards weren't watching. He'd fashioned a makeshift tool from a piece of metal stripped from his bed frame. Now, as the locks cycled, he worked the grate free and slipped into the narrow shaft. The ventilation system was tight, claustrophobic, the metal cold against his skin. But Marcus had trained in worse conditions. He navigated by memory, following the schematic he'd mentally constructed from maintenance schedules and overheard conversations. 15 minutes later, he emerged in the prison's lower maintenance level. This section was older, less monitored, a relic from when Volkov had been a Soviet-era mining operation. The guards rarely patrolled here. Marcus moved through the shadows, his body remembering skills honed over years of covert operations. He took down 2 guards silently, efficiently, stripping one of his uniform and credentials. The disguise wouldn't hold up under scrutiny, but it would buy him precious minutes. The alarm didn't sound until he was already past the inner security perimeter. By then, he'd triggered a small fire in the prison's kitchen storage area, a distraction created from smuggled cleaning chemicals. As personnel rushed to contain the blaze, Marcus slipped through a service entrance and into the mining tunnels beneath the complex. The tunnels were a labyrinth of darkness and ice. Without proper equipment, most men would die of hypothermia within hours. But Marcus had prepared. He'd been taking cold showers, conditioning his body. He'd stolen extra clothing during laundry duty. And most importantly, he knew exactly where these tunnels led, to an abandoned mining station 3 miles from the prison. The journey was brutal. The temperature hovered near zero. His breath formed clouds in the darkness. Every muscle screamed in protest. But Marcus pushed forward, driven by something stronger than physical pain, the need for justice. He emerged from the tunnels at dawn, exhausted but free. A stolen motorcycle, arranged months ago through a carefully cultivated contact among the prison's civilian contractors, waited under a tarp near the abandoned station. Marcus didn't look back at the mountain fortress. He had one mission now: find the truth about who had framed him and why. The contact came through on an encrypted frequency Marcus had memorized from his military days. He'd reached out the only way he could through a series of coded messages left on darknet forums, hoping that someone from his old life would be watching. Sarah Chen had been watching. She was the younger sister of Ambassador Chen, the man Marcus had been convicted of killing. But Sarah was also former CIA, an intelligence analyst who had left the agency under mysterious circumstances. If anyone would be willing to help him or at least hear him out, it would be her. They met in a safe house outside St. Petersburg, a nondescript apartment in a working-class neighborhood where foreigners attracted little attention. Marcus arrived first, checking the perimeter, ensuring he hadn't been followed. When Sarah entered, her expression was guarded, her hand never far from the weapon concealed beneath her jacket. "Give me one reason not to turn you in," she said coldly. Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Because you know I didn't kill your brother." Sarah's jaw tightened. "The evidence was manufactured," Marcus interrupted. "Every piece of it. Someone wanted your brother dead and needed a scapegoat. I was convenient." "Then who?" Sarah demanded. "Who would go to that much trouble?" Marcus leaned forward. "That's what I need your help to find out. Before I was arrested, your brother was investigating something. A weapons deal, maybe. Or intelligence leaks. Something big enough that powerful people wanted him silenced." Sarah was silent for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a slim tablet. "My brother kept encrypted files. Personal notes. I've been trying to decrypt them for 18 months. Marcus felt a spark of hope. "What's in them?" "I don't know yet," Sarah admitted. "But if what you're saying is true, the answers are in here. My brother was careful. If he found something dangerous, he would have documented it. Can you break the encryption?" Sarah shook her head. "Not alone. I need help. There's someone, a hacker named Viktor Volkov. He's expensive and dangerous, but he's the best." Marcus nodded. "Then we find him." Viktor Volkov operated from a fortified compound in the Ural Mountains, a former Soviet research facility he'd purchased through various shell companies. Getting to him required navigating a network of criminal contacts and underground information brokers, each taking their cut and asking no questions, but before they could reach Viktor, they had another problem: Alexei Kozlov. Kozlov was a legend in the Russian mercenary world, a former Spetsnaz commander turned private military contractor. He specialized in tracking high-value targets, and he'd been hired by someone with deep pockets to ensure Marcus Cade never reached civilization. Their first encounter came 3 days after Marcus's escape, in a remote village near the Finnish border. Marcus and Sarah had stopped to resupply, thinking they'd maintained enough distance from the prison to be safe. They were wrong. Kozlov and his team hit the village at dawn. The first Marcus knew of the attack was when bullets shredded the window of their rented room. He grabbed Sarah, pulling her to the floor as glass rained down around them. "Back exit," Marcus shouted. Already moving, they ran through the narrow corridors of the boarding house, Kozlov's men pursuing. Marcus could hear their tactical communications, the professional coordination of trained soldiers. These weren't prison guards or local police. This was a military operation. They burst into the rear alley. A black SUV screeched to a halt, blocking their escape. Kozlov stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, his face scarred from years of combat. He held a pistol loosely at his side, confident. "Marcus Cade," Kozlov said in accented English. "You're skilled. I'll give you that. But this ends here." Marcus positioned himself between Sarah and the mercenary. "Who sent you?" Kozlov smiled. "Does it matter? The contract is clear. You don't leave Russia alive. Then you'll have to kill me here. If necessary." Kozlov raised his weapon. Marcus moved first. He grabbed a piece of debris from the alley and hurled it at Kozlov's gun hand, then charged forward. The two men collided with brutal force. Kozlov was powerful, trained in Sambo and military combat techniques. But Marcus had been forged in the crucible of Delta Force operations. They were evenly matched. The fight was vicious and efficient. Punches, grapples, attempts to gain positional advantage. Sarah fired shots at Kozlov's men, keeping them at bay while the two operators battled. Marcus managed to disarm Kozlov, sending his pistol skittering across the icy ground. But Kozlov responded with a devastating elbow strike that sent Marcus reeling. Before either could press the advantage, Sarah shouted a warning. Police sirens wailed in the distance. The village authorities were responding to the gunfire. Kozlov cursed in Russian, backing toward his vehicle. "This isn't over, Cade." "I'm counting on it," Marcus replied. They escaped in opposite directions, leaving the village in chaos behind them. Viktor Volkov's compound was exactly as intimidating as his reputation suggested. The facility was surrounded by electrified fences, guard towers, and sophisticated surveillance systems. But Marcus and Sarah had something valuable: information. Sarah had researched Viktor's operations and discovered he had a weakness. He collected rare Soviet-era computing hardware, remnants of the Cold War era. They leveraged a contact who possessed a working Soviet mainframe from the 1970s, a piece Viktor had been trying to acquire for years. It bought them an audience. Viktor himself was younger than Marcus expected, mid-30s with sharp features and the intense focus of someone who lived primarily in digital spaces. His compound's interior was filled with servers, monitors displaying cascading code, and enough computing power to crack most encryption in existence. Ambassador Chen's files, Victor mused, examining the tablet Sarah provided. Interesting. Military-grade encryption, custom algorithms. Someone didn't want these read. Can you break it? Sarah asked. Victor's expression suggested the question was insulting. Of course. The question is when, not if. It took 3 days. During that time, Marcus and Sarah remained in the compound, watching as Victor's systems methodically dismantled the encryption layer by layer. Marcus spent the time preparing, knowing that once they had the information, the real danger would begin. On the 3rd day, Victor summoned them to his primary workspace. On the central monitor, Ambassador Chen's files were finally readable. What they revealed was staggering. Chen had uncovered evidence of a massive international conspiracy, a weapons trafficking network operating at the highest levels of multiple governments. The network, codenamed Iron Mountain, facilitated illegal arms sales to conflict zones worldwide. More damaging, it implicated officials in the American, Russian, and Chinese governments. Chen had been killed because he'd gotten too close to exposing the entire operation. And Marcus had been framed because he was the perfect scapegoat, a skilled operative with access and opportunity. There's more, Victor said, pulling up another file. Names. Banking records. Communication logs. Everything needed to burn this network to the ground. Sarah's hands trembled as she read through the documents. My brother died for this. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. Then we make sure his death meant something. We expose this. Victor copied the files onto multiple encrypted drives. Where will you take this? Marcus had already been considering the options. There's a journalist in Berlin, Rebecca Hartmann. She's exposed government corruption before. She'll know what to do with this. Getting to Berlin won't be easy, Sarah warned. Kozlov is still out there. And now that we have this information, they'll send everything they have to stop us. Marcus's jaw set with determination. Then we'd better move fast. The extraction from Russia was a nightmare of close calls and narrow escapes. Kozlov had anticipated their likely routes and positioned his teams accordingly. The journey west became a running battle across the frozen landscape. They nearly died twice, once when Kozlov's team ambushed them at a border crossing, and again when a drone strike demolished the safe house they'd been using in Belarus. Each time, Marcus's training and Sarah's intelligence work kept them one step ahead, but Kozlov was relentless, and he was learning their patterns. The final confrontation came in Warsaw, just hours before they were scheduled to meet with Rebecca Hartmann. Marcus and Sarah were in a rented apartment, preparing the final data package, when Kozlov's team breached the building. This time, there was no escape route. Kozlov had learned from their previous encounters. He'd brought overwhelming force. Marcus heard them coming, the subtle sounds of professional operators clearing rooms. He grabbed Sarah, moving her to the apartment's reinforced interior bathroom. Stay here. No matter what happens, protect those drives. Marcus, that's an order. He didn't wait for her response. He stepped into the main room just as Kozlov and 3 of his men entered. Nowhere left to run, Kozlov observed. Marcus stood his ground. I'm done running. What followed was brutal. Marcus fought with everything he had, using the confined space to his advantage, preventing Kozlov's men from overwhelming him with numbers. He took down the first operative with a savage strike to the throat. The second fell when Marcus used a lamp as an improvised weapon, but there were too many. A bullet grazed Marcus's side. Another struck his shoulder. Pain exploded through his body, but he kept fighting. Kozlov himself engaged, and they crashed through furniture, neither man giving quarter. They were equals in skill, but Marcus was wounded and exhausted. Slowly, inevitably, Kozlov gained the upper hand. The Russian mercenary pinned Marcus against the wall, his forearm crushing Marcus's throat. You should have stayed in prison, Cade. At least your death would have been quick. Marcus's vision was darkening. He could hear Sarah shouting from the bathroom, knew she was about to do something foolish to try to save him. Then the apartment door exploded inward. Polish special forces flooded the room, weapons trained on Kozlov and his men. The mercenaries froze, recognizing the tactical situation was now impossible. Drop your weapons, the lead officer commanded in Polish accented English. Kozlov's eyes narrowed, but he released Marcus, who collapsed to the floor gasping. How? Sarah emerged from the bathroom, her phone in hand. I sent the files 20 minutes ago. Every major intelligence agency, every news outlet, every anti-corruption organization. They're already public. Rebecca Hartmann stepped through the doorway behind the tactical team, her camera crew filming everything. And we have everything on record. The world is watching now. Kozlov's expression was unreadable as Polish officers moved to restrain him and his team. As they led him away, he glanced back at Marcus. You won. But the people behind Iron Mountain, they're bigger than me. This isn't over. Marcus managed a pained smile. It is for you. The aftermath unfolded rapidly. The Iron Mountain files dominated global headlines for weeks. Governments scrambled to contain the damage as officials were arrested, intelligence agencies were investigated, and international weapons trafficking networks were dismantled. Marcus was officially exonerated. The evidence of his framing was overwhelming, and the Russian government, eager to avoid further embarrassment, quietly acknowledged the wrongful conviction. The American government, while initially defensive, eventually issued a formal apology and restored Marcus's military record. 3 months later, Marcus and Sarah stood outside a memorial in Washington, D.C., where Ambassador Chen's name had been added to a monument honoring diplomats who had died in service. The inscription now included the truth, that he'd been murdered for trying to expose corruption. He would have been proud, Marcus said quietly. What we accomplished. Sarah nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. He always believed the truth mattered more than anything. Even his own life. They stood in silence for a moment, watching as visitors passed by the memorial, reading the names, remembering the sacrifices. What will you do now? Sarah asked. Marcus considered the question. He'd spent so long fighting, surviving, seeking justice. Now that it was over, the future felt strange and uncertain. But also full of possibility. I think, he said slowly, I'll try living for a while. No missions. No operations. Just living. Sarah smiled. That sounds nice. What about you? I'm writing a book. About my brother, about Iron Mountain, about everything that happened. Someone needs to tell the full story. Marcus nodded approvingly. He'd like that. They remained at the memorial until sunset, two people who'd been through hell and emerged on the other side, forever changed but unbroken. The truth had cost them both dearly, but in the end, it had set them free. As they walked away from the memorial, Marcus felt the weight he'd been carrying for 18 months finally lift. He was no longer a fugitive, no longer a convicted criminal. He was simply Marcus Cade, a man who'd fought for justice and won. The Iron Mountain conspiracy was finished. And finally, so was his war.